Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose, as long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. These are your hosts, Alex and Sean. On this episode, we have all types of Bears free agency news, the cornerbacks of the NFL draft, and some interesting play from the Blackhawks. All this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. So head on over to icehogs.com, get yourself a hat, jersey, shirt, tickets, and more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. So, Alex, it has been another week of interestingness in Chicago sports.
Yeah, probably some of the most interesting we've had in a while, considering the moves that the Chicago Bears have made. That's probably captured the most attention this week, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just debating: do we knock the other stuff out of the way and then just settle on in like an old man in a warm bath with the Bears, or do we jump right into the Bears?
You know, I like that first idea because I think there's a lot to talk about with the Bears, and it's good to just kind of do it all in one bit, I guess.
Sure. So, little bits of Cub news is not much in spring training, and they've been playing a lot of the younger guys. But Joe Madden has teased at what he thinks is, or that what might be the opening day lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to jump in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, first, we kind of know about the whole Schwarber thing leading off, but he's also been talking about where he's going to put Addison Russell. I know he's been debating in the 5 spot. There's also been some talks of whether or not he's going to bring back the whole bat pitcher 8th type deal, but I don't think anything's set in stone. But from what it looks like, the top of the order is going to be Schwarber, Bryant, Rizzo, Zobrist. It's just kind of like, okay, do you put Addison Russell 5th, and then you can have, whoever's catching 7th, or Jason Hayward 6th probably, and then catching 7th, and then you got your 8 and 9 spots. So, with this Cubs team, it's so open. This team is so deep. This team is going to have multiple lineups, so the possibilities are almost endless.
Yeah, it was, and the couple of interesting things for me were the first one is in the projected possible order was John Jay was batting 9th.
Yeah,
and I guess that's probably going to change a little bit because he might flip flop that with John Lester, but it's just interesting. There's a guy that a lot of people talked about as potentially being the leadoff man is going to be batting 9th, which kind of leads into Joe's philosophy of having that second leadoff man rather than being the worst guy on the batting order. And then the other one is he hinted that because in the potential lineup is there's no Javi Baez, and he talked about how Ben Zobrist could be playing left or right to get Javi in there, depending on if the pitcher's a righty or a lefty. So it was interesting to think that maybe Schwarber's not even going to be in the lineup on opening night.
Yeah, that is an interesting question because you look at two things. You look at, you really want Schwarber's bat in the lineup, but wouldn't you have to have Javier Baez's defense in the lineup as well? It makes this so interesting because there are so many scenarios which you could go in, and you win either way. It's like, you got great defense by Baez at second, you have a veteran bat in Zobrist, and you could put in Kyle Schwarber if you wanted to in left field. So it's like, I guess it kind of depends on what Madden is feeling. It might depend on the matchup, who's going to be pitching. My feeling is that it's either going to be Martinez, their young flamethrower, or Adam Wainwright, because Adam Wainwright's been there a long time. He's been their opening day starter for quite a number of years. Either way, that's a right-handed pitcher right there, so maybe that affects the way Joe thinks. If he wants the more left-handed lineup, you'd probably put Schwarber in left, and you'd put Zobrist at second. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Like I said, the possibilities are endless.
I liked last year when they started with an American League team.
Yeah, you started with a DH.
You start right with the DH, and then you can, there's no questions about it, as you get everybody you want into the lineup. And then once you go back to a National League team, then it's no big deal because you've already have your opening series.
Right, exactly. Another thing that's interesting when I look at this lineup, I say to myself, Zobrist and Rizzo, 3-4. We saw that so much last year. And you're thinking, wouldn't traditionally like a guy like Chris Bryant be batting in Zobrist's spot? It's so interesting the way the Cubs work this lineup. Because at the end of the day, they're a sabermetrically built team. That's their philosophy. The main philosophy is to get on base. And the fact that you have a lineup full of guys that could just get on base at will allows you this flexibility to do so many different lineup creations. What I want Joe Madden to do one day, if the Cubs are they got a 10-plus game lead late in the year and you're just kind of playing games like last year, how fun would it be for Joe Madden to just go crazy one day? Say all right, we're going to bat Rizzo lead off, and then we're going to let Russell clean up. Because there's also talk about Russell's future ability to possibly be a cleanup type role. I just think it's so interesting when you look at this lineup and you could think you could do it so many ways and it would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, Joe is definitely one to put creative lineups in once the game doesn't really mean anything. What was the first game after they officially clinched the division? It was, I can't remember who the whole lineup was, but it was just an oddball lineup of none of the regulars. Everybody got the day off for the most part.
Yeah, it's like you had La Stella or Caesar leading off, kind of stuff like that. So, yeah, it allows a lot of space for creativity. Now, here's my question for you. Did you personally like the whole batting pitcher eighth thing? Because I know it's something that a lot of people like to criticize. We know Tony La Russa did it for so many years. He was known as the guy who batted his pitcher eighth. What's your opinion on that?
I don't know if I hit him strong either way, just because at first I thought, I was like, you know what, this is kind of smart because you get Addison Russell as a second leadoff guy, let him get on base, and then you have the top of your order on. But then I looked at statistics, and statistically, there's no difference. I don't know if it's just a smaller sample size of pitchers batting eighth, but it seems like more teams are starting to do it now that they saw the Cubs do it.
Right.
I don't know. It's just after seeing the statistics, you just wonder why they still do it, because although Joe is a little more of an old school guy, he does rely on the quote nerds. And if statistically they're saying it doesn't matter, then I don't know if he's just playing head games or if he thinks psychologically it's helping somebody batting eighth versus ninth. I don't know.
There were times not last year, 2 years ago in 2015 when he did bat the pitcher eighth. And look, I'm much more lenient now towards the advanced metric stuff. But if there was an old school element of the game that I would kind of talk about, and I know a lot of advanced statisticians don't like using these kind of words, but there were times when I got a little frustrated because there was a big, quote, RBI chance in the game, and it was the pitcher coming up instead of the eighth hitter. So it's like, well, John Lester, who isn't really known for hitting, is up in this big situation. So sometimes I question that. But at the same time, you know, you have a second leadoff guy right behind that. The overall statistics aren't that different. I guess it was just a little more frustrated when a big moment did come up and it was a pitcher. So I almost feel like it's not going to matter much longer because, honestly, I think within the next 4 years, there's just going to be a DH all around in baseball.
Oh, yeah. The DH in both leagues is coming sooner rather than later. And I have a friend who is like a diehard believer that the DH is the right way to do it. But he's super old school about baseball, which is weird to me. I think it's because he's an American League fan. But I don't know what your opinion on the DH is. I think it adds more strategy in the game to not have a DH. I think it
Sure.
It's weird because his argument is that, well, you want your 9 best hitters up there. Now, so having your pitcher bat, it doesn't make any sense. It's not putting the best out there. And I'm like, but you don't, like, what if you have somebody like Travis Wood, who's a good hitter, and you have a light hitting shortstop or a light hitting catcher? Is, do you well, he's a bad hitter, so let's put a different hitter in? I'm like, no, it's you play the game, you substitute in you put in your lineup your best lineup total, as far as hitting, as far as fielding. It's the whole Kyle Schwarber thing is, does his offense make up for his perceived lack of defense? You have to weigh these things, and that's part of the strategy of the game. The game is more than just going out there and playing. It's a lot of mental stuff. So I'm not the biggest fan of the DH, but it's not my choice.
Yeah, my opinion on the DH has evolved a little bit. For a long time, I was a pure NL screw the DH type thing where I'm like, if you're on the field, you should bat kind of thing. The way baseball is changing, the way it's going towards the sabermetrics, the way it's going more towards the on-base philosophy, the way lineups are shaped, the more I could come to accept it for a few reasons. The way baseball is played, it seems like defense is valued more than ever, for one. So, a DH could be used as kind of to kind of filter out the Achilles heel on defense. Like if there's a good bat in your lineup that can't play defense for a lick, for example, a Nelson Cruz, you could argue Jose Abreu, those kind of players. Like, it works in that sense. And it also works in the sense where if you're of the more on-base mentality, like for the Cubs, a DH fits a team like the Cubs so incredibly well. It allows your best fielders to be on the field and allows your best hitters and the best guys at getting on base to get on base. Now, for a while, we saw a typical DH in baseball kind of before the sabermetrics and the advanced metrics became huge, where you were seeing DHs who were like, well, they're big, old, fat guys that could hit 30 home runs but strike out 200 times a year and bat 230. That was a DH type for a while.
Rob Deere.
Yeah, Rob Deere, exactly. Even like Adam Dunn as a member of the White Sox, like those kind of people. Now, with the way baseball is going offensively, it makes things a little more balanced. Now, I still sometimes like the idea of the pitcher batting, but if they were to change it in the National League, which it's going to come sooner or later, I wouldn't be as upset about it now or in the future as I was, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that if it happens, I'm not gonna stomp my feet and pound around like an infant. But if it was up to me, I would keep the way it is with a DH in the AL and pitcher batting in the NL. But I know it's coming, and it's one of those things is, like you said, I've evolved a little bit, and I like the interleague play where you get to see National League teams have to adjust when they go to an American League city and vice versa.
It's particularly interesting when you see American League pitchers who haven't batted in God knows how long bat again. It really is kind of fun to watch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, watching Chris Sale bat is ridiculous.
Yeah, or like watching Mark Burley when he hit a home run in Milwaukee a few years ago. I'm not even a Sox fan, but I remember watching that. I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty cool.
Or, I mean, not to be mean-spirited, but Jim Abbott batting.
Yeah, one arm. Just kind of toggling it.
To be fair, he batted .750 at University of Michigan.
Jim Abbott was a freak of nature. What he was able to do with one hand, I mean, he threw a no-hitter once.
Yeah.
That guy's a legend.
Yep, that motion where he put the glove on in mid-motion.
Yeah, it's like, how do you do that? Because you got to be ready in case a scolding line drive off a major league hitter comes flying right at you.
I've seen it happen. He puts that glove on quick and boom, ready to react.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing.
Yeah, I was always a fan of Jim Abbott.
Yeah, and like I said, he was a good player too. It's not like he's like, you know that ambidextrous pitcher that came up with the A's? Do you remember him?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but I remember he was just I don't know. It's kind of like when, what team was it, had the female goalie, and it was just a kind of a gimmicky thing. It's not
right. Yeah, he was never that good, but like you said, he was something to attract attention. Jim Abbott was good. He was a good ball player.
Yeah, Jim Abbott was a solid middle of the rotation guy.
Yeah, and he had a decent career. You know, like he played for a good amount of time, so it's not like he was called up for like a year and played like a year and a half, and that was it. He had a pretty solid career, lengthwise and playing wise.
Yeah, absolutely. He had 87 career wins.
Yeah,
that's a good number of wins.
Wasn't he on the White Sox for a little bit? I mainly remember him on the Yankees.
He was. He played on the. I remember him mostly for the Angels. So he was on the. I'm sorry, the Angels. He was on the Angels, and then he went to the Yankees after that. Went to the White Sox for 95. Then he went back to the Angels, and then came back to the White Sox in 98, and then last season was in 99 in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I knew he spent some time in Milwaukee. I know it wasn't long, but I think I remember Abbott most with the Yankees because that's who he threw the no-hitter with, so that's the main highlight I've seen of him. So that's probably why I remember him as a Yankee.
In 1991, he went 18-11 with a 2.89 ERA.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Was he ever an All-Star?
I'm sure he was that year or the year after.
He should have been. Those are good numbers.
Let's see, he was AL Player of the Week once. It doesn't say, but yeah, he was a pretty solid pitcher. I mean, he had a 4.25 ERA for a career spanning a decade. It's not terrible.
Considering he played pretty much a decade, considering he had one hand, you know, you gotta give him props.
You gotta give him props.
Because, you know, that kind of ERA is like, it's like an average ERA. Like, the average ERA is just a little above 4. So, you know, solid pitcher.
He batted 190 in his, his OPS. He batted 100 his last year. That was the only year he had an at-bat. He had 21 at-bats that year.
You know, I thought I saw a video of him getting an infield single. It might have been against the Cubs. I saw it a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube if you ever look up Jim Abbott batting. So,
yeah. But we're getting close to that opening day for the Cubs, and it's at this point, I think everybody is ready for it. The team, the fans.
Oh yeah.
It's it's ready to get that defense of the World Series title underway.
Yeah, and their attitude towards this whole thing, it makes me worry less about a potential hangover because they really feel like they are ready to do it again, and they're not living in this glory and just focusing on the glory that they did. They knew they were the best Cub team ever. They knew they ended the long curse. They knew that they were, on top of the world for a good number of months, but they also realized that it's a new season, it's a new year, and we got to continue this. We're not just going to keep living in the past. We got to continue this. They don't want to be a one-and-done team. Theo doesn't want them to be a one-and-done team. They are ready to keep rolling, and that kind of attitude, the way they're working hard, you see all the tweets, and you see the video, you see the stories. They're working their butts off more than ever, and they are ready to go at this again. So I'm really not too worried about a potential hangover, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not worried about a hangover either. I'm just worried about the starting pitching staying healthy. It's the only thing in the world I'm worried about.
Oh, sure, that's a natural concern because we were blessed last year that we really never had any starting pitching injury issues at all. Not that I can remember. Lester was healthy. Arrieta was healthy. Hendricks was healthy. Lackey was healthy. And, you had a spot start every now and then with Montgomery or Adam Warren just to kind of expand the rotation. But when it came to health, we really had no issue.
Yeah, so I don't want to talk about the Bulls. Because if it was already bad, this week was worse. But there was a few games of the Blackhawks this week. They came back off of not a bye so much as just a long gap in games. They had what 5 days off again.
Yeah, it was almost a week.
Yeah, and just like the last time they had a bye, they came out a little flat. A little less so this time. Thursday they ended up playing and they lost 1-0 to Anaheim. Friday they lost 4-2 to Detroit, which was not a good loss. But then they came back this afternoon, played an early game, and played really well against the Minnesota Wild and beat them 4-2.
Crawford better get a steak dinner from that team because he bailed out the Hawks today. He really did.
Oh, absolutely, he did. He looked great, and he's looking again like the Corey Crawford that we saw in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, because people were saying, "Oh, what happened to him? Did the surgery mess him up for good?" It's like, well, I think he's back.
Yeah, he played fantastic. What do you have? 43 saves, 44,
something like that. I know it was over 40. Because the Wild had like 32 shots after 2 periods. And then the Wild kept the momentum going and kept getting shots on Corey Crawford, but he just kept stopping him. I mean, there were some really impressive saves. There was the one on, I want to say it was it Niederreiter or was it, I can't remember who it was, but he had a wide open net, and he shoots it. In the last second, Crawford comes across with his leg and just stretches out and kicks it away. And then I think it was the third period. They were up 3-2 when Parise was streaking on a breakaway, and Crawford just shut the door.
Yeah, and so this game was a fun one because it was a fast-paced game. It was a fairly clean game, and it was two good teams. And you saw there was no lack of shots on goal.
Oh, it was entertaining from beginning to end because, when you look at that Detroit game, that game was torture. I mean, that was just scurrying for the puck in the neutral zone and just kind of skating around. That game was awful to watch. This one was constant action.
Yeah, it was nice that the Blackhawks got to the Wild and got in Devin Dubnyk's head because they pulled him in the first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's always nice to see. And this was series finale between the two for this season, and the Blackhawks won that 1-2-1.
Yep.
So, in those 4 games, Blackhawks, Minnesota was 1-2-1 against them. So, it's nice for the Blackhawks to one of the best teams in one of the best records in hockey, and the Blackhawks did very well against them. It's good to see.
And now they're only trailing them by 1 point. It's really, really close. And, every game that they played, those two, they were all close, tight games. It goes to show right there how good both those teams are, that they're battling so closely with each other. Whether it's down to the way the defense plays, the scoring, how they play, or how the goaltending plays. I mean, it's right down to the wire. And then Marian Hossa with that beautiful breakaway goal on a great Duncan Keith pass. When they scored that goal, there was a huge just sigh of relief. It's like, boy, that's a huge goal, because I think it was about 5 minutes left in the game, and the Wild were still coming, and I'm thinking to myself the whole time, like, well, they're probably going to tie it up with the way they keep coming and coming. And then Hossa scores, and then they get that power play, and all they do is sit in the Wild zone and just pass it and play keep away. And you see how frustrated the Wild are getting. I'm just like, this is wonderful. It was the perfect way to burn off that clock there. So despite the sluggish shakiness throughout most of the game, the Hawks really finished strong.
Oh, absolutely. And Minnesota's a very, very good team, and I think they've, for the most part, have done very well against everybody and not just the powder puffs of the league.
Oh, sure.
The big difference between these two going into the playoffs is that when it comes down to it, most of these Blackhawk players, the veterans, they have ice water running through their veins.
Yep.
They've been there. They have been as close to elimination as possible and pulled victory from the jaws of defeat. Look at the big one was that kind of spiraled Detroit Red Wings out of downward is when they were playing against them in the playoffs and came back from a 3-1?
Yep, they were down 3-1. The Blackhawks looked dead in the water, and then next thing you know, they beat them in Game 7 in overtime.
Yeah, and so it just they have this experience that the Wild doesn't have, and Corey Crawford, you're not going to shake that guy. You may beat him, you're not going to shake him and rattle him.
Right.
And Devin Dubnyk, the Wild have good goaltending. It's just, is the experience there? Do they have that next level to step up to if need be?
Here's the thing, Devin Dubnyk is very inconsistent because he will go through stretches where you cannot get anything by him, and then he'll go through stretches where he'll struggle. And in 2 years, the Minnesota Wild, we have seen him get lit up in the playoffs by the Hawks in 15, and last year the Stars torched him up pretty good too. So you don't know what Devin Dubnyk is going to show up. Corey Crawford, you can depend on him. He has been to 3 Western Conference Finals in 3 years and won 2 Stanley Cups. And like you said, this team, the ice water in their veins, if they don't show it in the regular season at times, they usually darn well show it in the postseason. Now, you talk about being down 3-1 like that Detroit series. Look back since 2011. They were down 3-0 to the Canucks and forced overtime in Game 7. In 2013, down 3-1 to the Red Wings. They come back, force Game 7, and win in overtime. 2014, down 3-1, force Game 7 overtime against the LA Kings. They should have won that game, but they didn't. But still, they were down 3-1. And then, against the Ducks, they were down 3-2. Came back and won that series. Last year, down 3-1, forced Game 7 in St. Louis. Just miss out on winning that game. So, the Hawks seem like they are sometimes at their most dangerous when they're down.
Yeah, it's because it takes a certain, I don't know, ability to be able to step on the throttle when you have the lead and you're going to go for the win in a series. It really does take that next effort, and the Blackhawks have that ability to not let that happen and really just put in their best effort when they're faced with that deficit. And there's only a handful of teams in the conference that have achieved success over the last decade, and the Blackhawks are one of them, and the Kings are another. And so,
and the Kings might not even make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, so teams that are like the Wild, they haven't been there. They haven't been to that point where they've developed, or they've even had the opportunity to develop that like killer instinct. And the Blackhawks have faced it from teams way better than the Minnesota Wild. Minnesota's not a knock on them, but the Ducks team they faced and the Kings team they faced, those were much better teams than this year's Wild.
Oh, that Ducks team in 2015, I thought if there was a team that was going to beat us in the Western Conference that year, it was going to be the Ducks.
Yeah, they're a really good team. Everybody in the world was shocked that the Blackhawks won that series, except for the players in the Blackhawks locker room.
Yeah, pretty much, because when the Ducks were up 3-2, I didn't fully lose faith, but I'm like, that I don't know about this one. Maybe they could win at home, but could we really win in their house? Not only did we win in Anaheim, we beat them good in that Game 7. I mean, we built that 4-0 lead. And then they kind of scored some goals in garbage time, the Ducks did, but they were never in that game.
No, so it was as good as... It's the same thing with the Sharks, as the Ducks and the Sharks throw out amazing teams every year, and they can't get over that hurdle. They don't have that instinct to be able to finally pull out a big series win. And it's something you can't teach. It's just something that's inside of you. And I just don't know if the Wild have that.
Right, exactly. Because every year, the past, I'd say 4 years, we see how improved the Wild are, and people say, oh man, they're different this year, look at them, but they haven't gotten over that hurdle. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, I'll believe it when I see it, because we've said this year after year the past few years that it's not about the regular season, it's about what you do in the playoffs. And that whole getting over the hurdle thing, I was telling this to one of my friends the other day. It doesn't seem like anything is more frustrating than being a Washington Capitals fan.
Yeah, and I saw that Shattenkirk got suspended.
Yeah, I heard about that. I didn't see what he did, but I know there's some controversy over it.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. I just saw the headline pop up on NHL.com.
Yeah, same. I'd have to look at what he did, but we say every year, we're like, man, look at that Capitals team. Is this the year they finally go deep into the playoffs? Every year they're out by the second round.
Yeah, that's why I look at like the Penguins to come out of the East, just because of just I guess with the Capitals, it's just like what you're talking about. It's the same thing that you see with the Sharks and the Ducks, is they're never able to finally pull the trigger and get it done. So I just, as good of a team as they are, and they have been this year, and they finally just they put all their bullets in the gun and ready to fire. And until they do it, I'm gonna assume it's gonna be the Penguins coming out of the East.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. And I feel like for many of these years, the Capitals have been victimized by running into the wrong team at the wrong time. It seems like whenever they're eliminated, they run into the team that's hot. Like last year when they ran to that Penguins team, the Penguins were on fire at the end of the season going into the playoffs. And, I'm like, this Penguins team, I'm like, watch out for them. I know everyone's talking about the Caps, but watch out for this Penguins team. They won the Stanley Cup. The year before that, they ran into that Rangers team, and the Rangers were riding high until they lost Game 7 at home against Tampa Bay in 2015. Going back to 2010 when they won the President's Trophy, I remember when they faced the 8th seed Habs in the first round, and the Capitals were up 3-1 against them. Looked all but done. Yaroslav Halak, who was a Hab at the time, played out of his dang mind, and they won that first round series against the Capitals. And then I think the next year they ran into Tampa Bay and got swept. So I just feel like a lot of the times the Capitals they run into that team that's super hot. And it always happens before the conference finals. Because think about having a player like Ovechkin for a decade and not even making it to a Stanley Cup finals. Like, think about that. How frustrating does that have to be?
Yeah, and it's I honestly see it continuing this year. The East has some really good teams. That Ottawa team is good. Montreal is good. Boston is able to play well in spurts. Pittsburgh's good. Columbus is good. So there's teams that they're going to have to go through. They're not going to have a cakewalk to go through to the Stanley Cup by any means.
No, and the most frustrating thing for them is they had a stretch of a few years where the East was not very strong, and they just ran into that one team that was playing better than them at the time. That was ultimately their downfall, because you remember a few years ago, the strength was in the West. The West had the stacked teams, and, in 2014, the Hawks losing that Game 7 against the Kings, they lost the Stanley Cup. The Rangers weren't beating either of those teams. Now we're saying, man, look how stacked the East is. So it's like the Capitals really had their best chance competition-wise to win the East. But they did it.
Yeah, I mean, if in as far as the Blackhawks go, I mean, at this point, they're getting close to being a lock for the playoffs.
Yeah.
There's like 14 games left, and the Blackhawks are how many points? They're up by 14 points on Nashville, and only a point behind Minnesota. But for me, the dream path to the Stanley Cup Finals would be Nashville, St. Louis, and Calgary.
Yeah, right. Now,
Calgary's a good team, but
they're not.
Much rather see them
in a 7-game series.
No, but I'd much rather see them than Anaheim or San Jose.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I've said, the Wild are by far the biggest challenge for the Hawks in this playoffs. Now, as we talked about before, getting to the finals could be very, very tough. Winning the finals, but I really, really want to see this team win one more cup. I know I said in 2015 that winning the third was kind of going to be my, quote, satisfaction level, but I want one more. I think 4 cups would really seal the deal as this team being a dynasty. I know they're already being called a dynasty already, but this could really seal the deal with a 4th one. Because there's kind of the debate of, well, how much is a dynasty? I'd argue they're a dynasty now. 3 Stanley Cups in a salary cap era in a span of less than 10 years with the same basic core. You've been to the conference finals 5 times. I mean, oh man, there are times when that Game 7 against the Kings still really irks me, because you could think that's 3 straight Stanley Cups right there. That was a nightmare.
I mean, if this was the 70s or 80s, you'd say, okay, no way this is a dynasty, just a good team. But in the salary cap era, especially in the these last few years of the salary cap where the cap hasn't moved. It hasn't
Right.
budged.
Right,
And
exactly.
So it's you know, it's a tough time to win consistently. So I would say that they're a dynasty based on not just the Stanley Cups, but the you know, how close they've been to other Stanley Cups. It's not like they floundered in these other years. They've been competitive teams and been able to reinvent themselves and retool around this core. But if they get one more, even the biggest doubters would have to say that's a dynasty.
Absolutely. Now, here's a question for you. I know this is kind of a painful memory to bring up. If the Hawks would have won that Game 7 in 2014, what would you think would have happened in the finals? I say the Hawks would have won those finals in 5 games, like the Kings did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was that Rangers, the Western Conference final was, for all intents and purposes, the Stanley Cup final.
Absolutely.
It was such, other than the final outcome of the series, that was such a fun series to watch.
Oh yeah.
If I have friends that are fans of, you know, a lot of other teams that have no vested interest in the Blackhawks or the Kings, and they were like, I've been absolutely glued to every minute of these games because this is what hockey should be. It was so awesome to watch, and you just knew that whoever won was just going to steamroll the Rangers, and the Kings steamrolled the Rangers, and I have zero doubt in my mind that had the Blackhawks won, they would have steamrolled them too.
Absolutely, because the only reason the Rangers won one game is because Henrik Lundqvist stood on its head for like 45 saves. So it was really kind of a few goals away from being a complete sweep. And that's why that Game 7 loss was so heartbreaking. I mean, I was mad about that game all summer long. I was so bitter towards the LA Kings. I was more bitter towards the Kings than I was towards the Packers in 2010. Because in 2010 with the Packers, I said, you know what? They were winning the entire game. Jay Cutler went down. It wasn't meant to be. That Game 7 for the Hawks, they played better. They managed the game better. The Kings got a few things go their way. Hint, hint, a goal that should have been offsides. And just the way they won it in overtime. By shooting the puck from the point. And this was so typical of the Kings that year. It's like every goal they scored was from a shot from the point, bouncing off a stick, then a leg, then a chest, and then somehow finding its way in the back of the net. It was, the whole thing about that game was so infuriating. The Hawks were 7 minutes away from going to the finals. They jumped out to a 2-0 lead. When they jumped out to a 2-0 lead, I said, this is over. When do the finals start? Wednesday night? I was with some friends. I'm like, I shouldn't have said this. I'm like, see you guys back here in my basement Wednesday for Game 1? And then that happened.
Yeah, I remember sitting there, and it was, my wife had gone to bed already, and I was just sitting there with just me and the dog, and I already, in my heart and every part of my body was just like, we're going to win this. It's just, It's not if, it's when.
Yep.
I'm just ready for it. It's going to be who scores this goal. And when the Hawks lost, I just, like, everything, like, stopped. The whole world stopped. And I just sat there going, wait a second. Did I fall asleep and this was a bad dream? And then, it's just intermission? And no, and it was just like, it just seemed like, I don't know, it was like the most implausible thing happened and you just weren't ready for it.
Yeah, I was in total denial. I'm like, this can't be over. It can't end like this. There's no way this could end like this. With a puck that bounced off Nick Leddy's freaking chest, fluttering in the air and going over Crawford. Like, I'm like, it can't end like this. because even though we blew those leads in the regulation time, going to overtime, I said, don't worry, Patrick Kane's going to score and win. We're going to the Cup Finals. I was 99.9% sure the Hawks were winning that game in overtime. And I'll never forget when the goal was scored and the Kings are on the ice celebrating. All you could hear was the cheering and laughing of the LA Kings, but that place was as quiet as you could possibly be with 22,000 people in there. And that was after I painfully watched those highlights again recently, and I can also remember this. During the game, the dead silence when the Hawks lost was after what I thought might have been the loudest and most amped up I've ever heard the United Center for a Hawks game.
It was. I just remember in the silence of everything was. It added to just how surreal it was, because I was sitting there and my whole house, everybody had gone to bed. It was just me and the dog, and was, you heard the Kings cheer. It was just silence in the background, and you're just like, it's silence outside. I live in the city and it's silence, and you're just like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah, I was sitting with two friends in my basement. We just sat on my couch. We didn't know what to say. We were in shock. I remember when the goal went in, my head just dropped. I just dropped my head. And none of us said anything for another good minute. And then I went, it can't end like this. There's no way it could end like this. My friends are just shaking their head. They didn't know what to say. And here's the Campbell Bowl coming out. Here's the handshake line. The organist is playing. When the Hawks win a series at home, they play Sweet Home Chicago, and everyone's cheering and waving their towels. All you could hear is the organ just playing, and they're shaking hands, and the crowd is dead silent, and people are heading for the exits, and the people who were still there were just standing there in disbelief, hands overhead. Like, that was the darkest moment in the Kane and Tays era. Now, I know people talk about the whole losing in Vancouver in overtime. That was in round one. That was a much better Vancouver team as compared to the Hawks and Kings, who were pretty evenly matched. And that was the first round. This was for the Cup Finals, and essentially for the Cup. Now, if we lose that Game 7, if the Kings come out and they just beat us 4-1, you tip your cap, you move on. It was clearly not meant to be. It was, you know what I mean? The way the Hawks lost, the way that they played a better game and lost, is what made it most heartbreaking.
Yeah, and hopefully, the Kings, even though I thought the Hawks were a better team, the Kings were a really, really good team, and they had won a cup previously, and they have veteran presence, and nobody in the West, I don't think, can match that right now. So if I would just be, maybe this is bold of me, but I see the Blackhawks going to the Stanley Cup Finals this year.
I could see it too. And I know there was a lot of doubt early on in the season, but this team is finding its mesh. The veterans are really starting to kind of help develop these young kids. The core of the team is still these veterans who have been there time after time. And when the Hawks find their groove, they're almost impossible to beat in a 7-game series. And another reason I really want them to get this one more cup. I don't know how much longer the window is going to be open. And that's not knocking the talent of the Blackhawks. But when you think about the age of some of these guys, when you think about the salary cap situation of this team, when you think about the expansion draft and what could happen there.
Which is going to be broadcast live, by the way.
Yeah, which is good, so we'll be able to stay up to date with it. I don't know how much longer this window for contention is going to be open. So I want them to grab just one more before it could possibly close. Because the way I see it right now, the window is not closed, but the hand is reaching for the top of the sill, and it might start to pull down soon. And you know what? It's when you got big contracts, when you got a salary cap, when your core players start to get older by each year, that's what happens. I mean, look at the Red Wings. They've been good for so long, and their championship window, frankly, closed a few years ago. It's been closed since 2010, 2011. But they're finally reached that point where they're not making the playoffs even. So, all good things do have to come to an end. That's why I want them to see them do it one more time before that window with this core closes.
Yeah, and the playoffs aren't going to start for another couple weeks, but we've got some really exciting games coming up for the Blackhawks. Is Tuesday at Montreal, which will be a good one. Thursday at Ottawa. Saturday at Toronto. And then the week after that, but the following week, the 27th at Tampa Bay, the 29th at Pittsburgh, and the 31st at home versus the Blue Jackets. So there's some really good, tough games coming up still before the regular season even ends.
Oh, absolutely. You're playing some really good teams, and of course, who doesn't love a good Original Six matchup? A matchup you only get to see a few times a year. You only get to go to Montreal once. You only get to go to Toronto once. You only get to go to Ottawa once. And, right now...
we'll never go to Joe Louis ever again.
Yeah, that was the final game the other night at Joe Louis Arena, so there was a little bit of a historical mark there. And I asked on Twitter, and Jim Cornelison actually retweeted this. I said, what was your favorite moment in the Joe Louis Arena, Hawks Wings wise? And most people said when Brent Seabrook went over to Jonathan Toews in 2013 to calm him down. That's when things started to turn around. That's honestly one of the few good things, because let's face it, for many, many years, that place was hell for the Hawks to play in.
Hell for a lot of people to play in.
True. Pretty much everyone.
Yeah, so I can't think of a better, more memorable moment than that. That was a biggie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also funny. In the Kane and Toews era, that Game 6 victory at the Joe Louis Arena is their only playoff win in that arena in the Kane and Toews era. Because in 2009, when they lost in 5 games to the Wings in the Western Conference Final, their one win was overtime at home. They didn't win any of those games at the Joe Louis Arena. And in 2013, they lost the first 2 games at the Joe Louis Arena, and they had to come back down from 3-1, and 2 of those 3 games that they won to win the series was at home. So it was that one victory in Game 6 is the one time they won a playoff game at Joe Louis Arena in the Kane and Toews era.
And that series, my in-laws were in town, and they like hockey, but they're not like diehard hockey fans. They're from Philadelphia area, so they're Flyers fans. Mm-hmm. So they like hockey enough where they knew it was a playoff game, and they sat down in my basement with me watching, and they were like, "This team's supposed to be good. They stink. They're going to get beat by the Red Wings." And I was so livid. I just didn't even want to talk to them. I was just like, done, can't deal. And they went home. They were the last night they were there was the last game that the Red Wings won. They went home and the Blackhawks won every game after that. And I was like, you guys are jinxers. You guys are jinxers.
Yeah, because they won Game 5, they beat them up 5-1 at home. Then they win 4-3 in Game 6, and then the overtime thriller in Game 7. But yeah, I guess it was the curse of the in-laws, I guess.
Pretty much.
And those games that they lost in games, especially in Games 3 and 4 at the Joe Louis Arena, I'll never forget the Red Wings just frustrating the hell out of the Blackhawks with the way they played, their approach, the way they tied up the Blackhawks sticks and whatnot. They were frustrating the hell out of the Hawks, and you could physically see it in their faces. They didn't know what to do, and then they finally made those adjustments, and next thing you know, they won the series.
Yeah, and that was an amazing series win. Even though the Red Wings were good, but they weren't great. But
right. They were 7th seed that year.
Yeah, the Blackhawks just like found that inner strength and came out and won that series. It was nice to see.
Yeah, and you know what? Like you said, that Blackhawks team was much better than that Red Wings team that year. Because the Red Wings legit chances, like, for championship contention, that kind of fizzled out after, like, the 2010 season, because they last made the finals in 2009, lost to Pittsburgh, and then since then, they haven't been past the second round, and most of those years, they've lost in the first round, so, you know, players started to get old, players started to move on, and, you know, things really changed, because when I was, like, a kid, I'm like, man, the Wings are going to be good forever. Like, they're never going to be bad. And we're seeing them, you know, times are very different in Detroit.
Yeah, it's nice to see. As a Blackhawks fan, it's nice to see.
Yeah, after them being good for over 2 decades, yeah, they could afford a few years off from being good.
Yeah. So, I think let's finally move on to the thing that I think a lot of people are going to be tuning in for. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears.
Yay.
So I finally will preface this by saying, I guess, you know, the thing everybody knows, Jay Cutler has been cut. He is now a free agent for the first time in his career, and Mike Glennon was signed by the Chicago Bears, and he was actually named over the weekend by Ryan Pace as the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears. So there's going to be no quarterback controversy. There's going to be no competition. He's going to walk in there, and as long as he's healthy, is going to be the starter on opening game. Those are the things that we know as fact. But I had to block the first person ever on Twitter for me, which some people were laughing about, because somebody was... I don't even, like, they're not one of my followers. I don't know. They must have been off a retweet. I was tweeting with somebody else. But first they were, I made a post about something along the lines of all the people that said anybody but Cutler are suddenly sounding very angry about Mike Glennon, which it's true. These people that were like, oh, Cutler sucks, anybody but Cutler. And you were like, okay, well, Cutler's gone and here's Mike Glennon. They're still not happy. And
yeah,
and it was meant to just be funny. I mean, it's not like I'm like, oh, Mike Glennon's going to be the savior or anything like that. I just thought it was a funny observation. And this guy, it must have hit really close to home for him, because he started being like really aggressive about it. And he's like, you know, Ryan Pace sucks because it's his job is to find quarterback talent. And I was like, listen, there's 32 general managers in the NFL, and there's like maybe at best 15 good quarterbacks in this whole league. So it's like, it's not that it's, you know, oh, this guy sucks because he can't find a quarterback. There's a problem with a lack of quarterback talent in the NFL. And he, you know, tweets back like, you know, Jesus Christ, you're an idiot. You're so stupid. And I'm just like, all right, you know, you need to calm down, block. Like, you know, it's one thing if you want to have a discussion about it, but another thing just like start throwing, you know, insults around.
What's this guy's solution? What's this guy's solution?
There is no. Yeah.
Let's trade for Aaron Rodgers. Let's give him Jeremy Langford, Jordan Howard, and Kevin White. And those are the kind of idiots that say stupid stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, a couple weeks ago I read like every first round quarterback over the past like 10 years, and there's not a lot of good names on there. As you know, like people are like, oh well, you know, why don't they draft Deshaun Watson? They could, but the thing is, there's a lot of red flags about him too. He might be a bust. There's a lot of question marks about him. He might be amazing. He might be Warren Moon. He might be Joe Montana. But we don't know.
And if they drafted him and he didn't turn out, Ryan Pace would be the first one to be blamed.
Yeah, everyone would forget that they wanted him, and they would be, super mad about it. You can't just watch what I saw him in the championship game, and that was the only college football game I saw all year of Clemson, and he was good in it, so he must be great. He's got a lot of talent, but who he reminds me of is a little bit of Jay Cutler, really strong arm quarterback that doesn't make good decisions all the time.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine if that ended up being the case with him, how he'd be crucified by the fan base? And look, when you look at Mike Glennon's deal, is he flashy? Is he exciting? No, he's really not. Ryan Pace is high on him. Do I think he's better than Jay Cutler? No, not necessarily. But I will say that if this is a bridge, and that's kind of what it looks like it's going to be, if it's a bridge for drafting and developing, I'm okay with that. If they're going to take a few years to work on this, then fine. What's frustrating is that us fans don't really have a clear idea of what the Bears are doing. We don't know exactly what the whole plan is. That's what's frustrating. Do they have a plan? Is it any good? I don't know. Is Mike Glennon going to be good? I wouldn't put money on him being great. Maybe he ends up being decent. Is he going to be here for the long run? I really don't think so. Like I said, I think he's going to be a bridge. But what people need to understand, you can't just go out and get Tom freaking Brady. You can't expect to just say, oh, we want a Tom Brady. Let's get a Tom Brady. It doesn't work like that. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, and it's not like he just grows on trees.
Yeah, it's, if you think about, here's the quarterbacks that you had available for you, potentially, is you had Brian Hoyer. You had him. He didn't do much for you. He moved the ball between the 20s. He was awful in the red zone, and that's what you're getting. He plays it really safe. He's okay quarterback. He's another option as a bridge, but they looked at it and they said, all right, is Brian Hoyer, we know his ceiling. We absolutely know what his ceiling is.
Right.
But Mike Glennon, we don't know where his ceiling is, and they're about the same level right now. So why not go with a guy who has an unknown ceiling? Maybe he's going to be not good, but we know what Brian Hoyer's ceiling is, and it's not anywhere near where we need it to be.
That's kind of one thing that frustrated me about a lot of Bears fans who kept lobbying for Hoyer all the time. They try to make the argument because he doesn't turn the ball over. I'm like, well, there's a difference between not turning the ball over and producing points than not turning the ball over and not producing points, because, Jay Cutler does something bad in the red zone. He's flocked for it, but Brian Hoyer was awful in the red zone. He was awful. He did not put up good numbers in the red zone. He was great from getting from the 25-yard line to about the 20-yard line in the other zone. So, but getting it into the end zone was a struggle for him. It really was. There's more than turning the ball over. And I think a lot of fans are just so frustrated with the Jay Cutler interceptions that they forget to think about, hey, just because he doesn't throw a lot of picks doesn't mean he's putting up huge productive numbers. And that's where I got frustrated with the Brian Hoyer apologists. And I'm not saying that I didn't get some arguments to, I guess, bring him back if they wanted just a one-year bridge year, but that's not what Ryan Pace wants to do. Like I said, I don't know how good Glennon's going to be. And if he doesn't turn out good and they end up drafting someone and developing him, oh well. They had a lot of cap room. They did. And they went out and spent it on something. From what I've heard from Hoyer, he seems pretty high on Glennon, more than most, if not all, people are. So
yeah, absolutely. And if you listen to anybody who is a former GM, current GM, or professional scout, and you ask them about Mike Glennon, is most of them have a lot of positive things to say about him. Way more positives than negative. I'm still not fully sold on him, and I know a lot of people freaked out when they saw it was a 3-year, $45 million contract. But honestly, if you actually look at the contract, it's for all intents and purposes a year-by-year deal.
Right.
So there's most of the upfront money. His base salary is pretty low in the first year, but then he's got most of his signing bonus right there. And then there's a lot of roster bonuses. So it pretty much works out as a year-by-year contract. So if Mike Glennon's terrible, it's not going to hurt you in the long term. It's not the Brock Osweiler contract, which was A, like almost double, and B, was huge signing money. And so it really hampered what you wanted to do. This is not going to hamper anything the Bears want to do. And it's a year-by-year contract. So if he's terrible, you can let him go. If you draft somebody and they come along really fast and they look like they're going to be the next Tom Brady or something, then you know what? Adios, Mike Glennon. Thanks for being tall.
Right, because when you have to look at a lot of NFL contracts, you have to look at the way money is spread out. You have to look at the way money is guaranteed, because it's not like just like, 3-year deal, he's stuck here for 3 years. No, it's like you said, it's a year-by-year basis, and you could play that off as a 1-year deal, and you could do what you want with him after 1 year. You want to let him go, you let him go. You want to keep him, you got to keep him. It's like if you sign someone a 1-year deal, you want to sign him back, okay, you can. You don't, go right ahead. So when people initially saw a 3-year deal, there was a lot of knee-jerk reaction, even including myself. I'm like, really, 3 years? But then I looked at the terms. I'm like, okay, that makes more sense. This to me says more bridge quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way it's structured is it's his base salary for next season is $8 million. He's got a $5 million roster bonus, which is going to kick in pretty soon, and a $3 million signing bonus. So that means this first year it's going to be $16 million. And next year it's going to be a $2.5 million roster bonus, $12.5 million base salary. In the third year, if he makes it, is $2 million roster bonus and a $12 million base salary. So basically, he gets $16 million this year. And if they don't like him, they cut him, and that's the end of it. You don't have to pay that roster bonus or the base salary. You pay the $16 million and nothing goes forward. Whereas some of these guys, if it's a 5-year contract for like Stephon Gilmore, I want to say it was like a 5-year, $60 million contract, $66 million contract, and like 30 of it was guaranteed. That means even if you cut him after the first year because he's awful and he hurts his knee and never becomes the same player or whatever the case may be, you're on the hook for $30 million. Same with Osweiler. The thing with him is you had so much guaranteed money. That's where you really get it.
That was the killer.
Yeah, I mean it was a pretty genius trade on both parts to get rid of him this year. They sent a second-round pick along with him to Cleveland to take him, and Cleveland had $100 million in salary cap room, so they basically took his contract and bought a second-round pick, and they are talking about eating his salary and trading him to somebody for another pick. So, because they have to have a certain salary cap floor, and there's not enough guys to be able to meet that, so they're fine with eating his cap money. That's no big deal to them. So if they eat his salary and they trade, there's gonna be teams that want to trade for him because he still has upside, and
hey, an injury comes along, someone might be calling.
Yeah, and they liked what they saw in Denver enough to want to re-sign him to big money. So it might have just been one of those things like a John Lester's first year and or a Hayward in his first year where that money affected the way they played and they didn't play the same way. If you have the guy now and Cleveland's eating his money or eating his contract, what's the harm in bringing him over? you give up a pick for him. Cleveland, they basically have been buying more picks.
Yeah, and you look at the salary cap room that they have, and you look at the number of picks that the Browns have for the next year or so. They have so much. If they don't build a good team with all this money and all these picks in the next 3 years, they'll never be good again, because the amount of picks that they have is pretty big.
Yeah, it's big, and if they start winning, insiders will be really mad, because it'll be a baseball group that turned around, a baseball sabermetrics group that turned around the Browns.
Could you imagine that? I mean, that is so funny to think about. Baseball sabermetrics turning around what looked like to be an impossible franchise to turn around in the Browns, turning them around.
Absolutely. So it's, I would like to see it, because I think NFL has gone very slowly towards more metrically driven things. And I think, the spread offenses in college and the inability to couple, the eyeball test and measurables with advanced metrics in the NFL. I think those two things coupled together are what's hindering the development of quarterbacks in the NFL. So it would be nice to see the Browns start to turn things around, because then other front offices are going to be like, all right, we need to start incorporating more metrics in what we do.
Yeah, and especially since kind of for a long time, a lot of NFL players or football players had that, oh, we want guys who are big and will hit and this and that. And with the way the rules are changing, with the way the game is evolving, you don't look at that as much anymore, and you look at more of what a player can do, kind of the smaller things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how it goes, and these next 2 years are going to be super telling with the Cleveland Browns, and with the Bears as well, because I think Ryan Pace, he has more of an old school type mentality, but I think he does look at some metrics, and it's hard to tell because we haven't gotten a full grasp of what he wants to do with this team. And he doesn't make himself accessible a lot, so it's really hard to tell. But I get that sense that he's more of an old school type guy, but he does, being so young, he does dabble in some advanced metrics. We saw with Emery, he was very metrics focused, but he was also he was a good evaluator of talent. He was just a bad general manager.
Yeah, I mean, you could evaluate some talent that only gets you so far when you don't fill in the right gaps and you don't develop them correctly.
And you hire a bad coach.
Huh, most of all. Bad coach, bad coaching staff. So yeah, I mean, I will admit, it is frustrating when it's really kind of unclear what the Bears' goals are. It's kind of frustrating that you can't really talk to Ryan Pace because he doesn't show his face in public much. It's not like the Cubs where Theo Epstein came in, he said, this is our goal, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we're going to do, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, here is what you're going to expect. We don't get that from the Bears. We don't really know what exactly they're saying right now. That, I will admit, is frustrating, but you have to give the guy a chance. You got to give him some more drafts. You got to let these young players that he's drafting develop. You got to see how the coaching staff either evolves or adapts, whether you keep John Fox or not, whether if you do keep those guys, how they evolve as they develop these young players. So there's so many questions to be answered. I just wish we had a better idea of what the approach is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I think with the Bears in this offseason so far, and we'll go through some of the moves that they've done, it just is every time that you feel like you've got a little bit of an explanation or a picture of where they're going, they'll make another move that leaves you head scratching.
Right, exactly.
So Alshon Jeffrey they let him first. We're like, all right, nobody knows what's going to happen. Are they going to franchise him? Are they not going to franchise him? Are they going to sign him to a long-term deal? What's going to happen? And then he comes out and says, all right, well, it becomes necessary to let a player test their what the market value is for them to help with negotiations. I'm like, okay, Alshon must want stupid amounts of money, and they're going to let him test the waters and then match the contract if it's reasonable. And clearly, the market wasn't there. This wide receiver market hasn't been there. I mean, Terrell Pryor didn't get the money he wanted. Alshon Jeffrey didn't get the money he wanted, and both of them signed one-year deals. And Alshon signed a one-year, $14 million deal, and it's not even all. That's incentive laden. It's like an $8 million base salary with incentives. That's where it starts getting questionable with what the Bears are doing, because if that's not a bad contract for Alshon, if $8 million guaranteed, if he doesn't perform or he gets suspended or he gets injured, $8 million, okay, you can swallow that for a receiver that you can get top production on. But you let him walk, you let him walk on a one-year deal. That left me head scratching, because either you are really confident what Kevin White is going to be and he's going to be healthy, or you overplayed your hand as the Chicago Bears.
Well, I asked this question on Twitter the other day. I said, did the Bears not want Jeffrey back? Did Jeffrey not want to go back to the Bears? Or was it a little bit of both? I know we've heard stories in the past saying he wasn't really happy in Chicago. I'm not sure if Ryan Pace was really high on him after a few things that happened. So I can't help but wonder if this was just kind of a mutual parting ways.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of. And part of me is, I heard a lot of the rumblings where he didn't want to be in Chicago and he wanted to be in a warm weather city. He went to Philadelphia. It's not a warm weather city.
No, it's not.
That's the thing that got me is, he would have signed with the Dolphins. Like, okay, well, that makes a little more sense. Or the Texans.
Or Tampa Bay or the Chargers.
The Cowboys or somebody. But instead, he goes to Philadelphia, which either means the market was abysmal for him, or that he just didn't want to go back to Chicago, and that was the one contract he got. I don't know what the behind the scenes was. And with Terrell Pryor, a lot of people were really high on him, and I think he's a very talented guy. And for him to get like a 1 year, $8 million contract with his talent, makes me think that he is a super locker cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what goes on in the locker room, obviously, but we know publicly that there have been problems in the locker room in the past, and you can't help but wonder what was going on with him and a few other of the players that we know have had locker room issues. So there's a lot of questions to be asked, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so your wide receiver core has been injury just decimated over the last several seasons, and you have been playing with scrubs and nobodies, which doesn't help your quarterback position.
Cam Meredith is our best guy right now.
Yeah,
Cam Meredith.
And, so we have our supposed top two guys, Alshon Jeffrey. They let him go walk in free agency for a 1 year minimal deal for a receiver of his talent. And then you're relying on Kevin White, who is broken bones the last 2 seasons and not been there. And you replace them with Marcus Wheaton and Kendall Wright, who are both guys coming off of injuries.
Yep, exactly. You also have the whole issue of, Alshon Jeffrey. What if he goes somewhere like he's going to Philadelphia? What if in Philadelphia he just freaking tears it up like 2013 Alshon Jeffrey did? It's going to make it even worse for Bears fans, and you're going to see more criticism towards the front office saying, why didn't you bring this guy back? And, maybe he wants to go play with Carson Wentz. Maybe he sees something attractive there. I don't know. It's certainly not for the warm weather thing. At least I hope he doesn't think that. If not, he's in for a little surprise. Maybe he knew that what was going on with the Bears and he just didn't want to be a part of it. Nothing to do with the past, but maybe he just flat out didn't want to play with Mike Glennon. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. And I was listening to an interview with the Bears tight end. My God, I'm having an old man moment. Zach Miller.
Zach Miller, yeah.
Yeah, I had listened to an interview with Zach Miller, and he played with Mike Glennon's rookie season in Tampa, and he speaks very highly of him. Of course, he speaks very highly of Jay Cutler too. So don't know where that is, but that's a nice thing that they have. They've at least worked together, so that's nice.
Yeah, I heard an interview with him on 670 The Score. Was that the one you were listening to?
Yeah, with
Bernstein and Goff.
Bernstein and Goff, yeah.
Yeah.
It was so it was nice to hear that he at least worked with him before and had some nice things to say about him.
I feel like Glennon, at least he'll bring a good attitude towards everything. Maybe it'll be refreshing for the front office, the coaches, and the players to have that kind of attitude. Attitude only does so much compared to how you play, but maybe it could do some good.
Yeah, and it helps that once he got off of his rookie contract, it's not like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were like, adios, peace out. They offered him $8 million a year to be the backup.
Right.
So they wanted him. They really wanted him. So that was, that's a good sign, is they saw enough of him to make him the highest paid backup in the NFL.
And you ask yourself this question: if he comes to the Bears and the Bears kind of work with him to fit a system he likes to play in, how much of a difference can that make? Because we've seen quarterbacks go from one system to another, and you see, a lot of changes, whether for good or for bad, and you can maybe see a potential of saying, hey, this guy is, a really good hard worker. He's willing to do certain things, and we're willing to adapt to the way he does things as well. So there's kind of a mutual understanding on both sides of what we want here. Maybe GMs look more into that than fans do, that we don't realize.
Yeah. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But as far as the wide receivers go, Kendall Wright coming off an injury, and he was somebody that the Titans had sort of moved on from.
Right.
But if he stays healthy, he's going to be productive in that slot receiver role. Marcus Wheaton, I just don't know how to feel about that one. Again, injury guy, and I just don't know where his place is and where what they have with Kevin White, and as far as his injuries coming along. And it's the wide receiver is a huge question mark for me right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's not much there, and I'm sure they'll address some of that in the draft. I'm sure they'll address maybe some more in some free. I don't think there's much available. I mean, this free agent class really isn't that huge, but they'll keep addressing that area more and more as the offseason goes. I really can't see them going into next season as Cam Meredith as their number one receiver on their depth chart.
Yeah. Let's see, who else did they re-signed Connor Barth to be their kicker, which not surprising, but I would imagine I would be shocked if they didn't bring in somebody to be camp competition. But expect Connor Barth to be their kicker going forward next year. They re-signed Christian Jones. They like his versatility and the ability to play special teams. And they re-signed Jonathan Banks, who was with them the last few games of the season. Which is another one of those things, is just depth and special teams ability. Let's see. They signed a swing tackle in Tom Compton from Atlanta, and I found that out before it got broken by any of the the beat writers or the national guys, Kyle Long tweeted out, Tom Compton is bigger than me and has tattoos. I should probably start bringing 2 lunches. So that's how I knew there. So that's nice that they have, at worst, they've got a swing tackle that can play left tackle or right tackle. But I would be shocked if they don't at least give him the chance to win that right tackle job or left tackle job.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's going to be some competition in that area, so we'll see.
Yeah, you have to feel comfortable with any of your above options as far as center and guards go, because if you decide to stick with what you had last year, and Kyle Long and Cody Whitehair and what's his face you got from the Packers, Josh Sitton as your other guard, like you feel comfortable with that. Or if Hroniss Grasu, you like what development you got from him after his injury, and you decide to move Cody Whitehair to guard and kick Kyle Long out to tackle, you still have to like your guard center guard option. It's just what you're going to do with those tackle positions, because both of them needed a strong upgrade after last year.
Right, and another huge concern right there is, on paper, the middle of that line, center, left, right, those guards, on paper, that's a pretty darn good front right there. But health, huge question. That's kind of what I'm worried about.
Yeah, because especially since Sitton's getting up there and Kyle Long has had some injuries, and Hroniss Grasu is coming off an injury. But I think you at least have enough options there. It's those tackle positions that are questionable. Yeah, so more Bears moves is they signed cornerback Marcus Cooper from the Arizona Cardinals, who played fairly well there. So I think that was a solid upgrade. I think that's one of those under the radar moves that's going to be good for the Bears next year.
Right. Yeah.
They signed another cornerback for a 1-year deal in Prince Amukamara, who was a highly regarded first-round pick several years ago with the New York Giants, and never really fully panned out there, but played fairly well last year with Jacksonville. But health has always been a concern for him, so I think that's, you bring him to a 1-year deal. If it works out, awesome. If not, you let him go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a low risk, high reward.
Yeah, and that fits right in with what Ryan Pace has been trying to do. That one made a lot of sense to me. I'm not that super high on Prince Amukamara, but he's at least a veteran that's in his prime, and no major injuries. It was a lot of none of those ones that are going to be detrimental to his career. So I wasn't shocked by that one, and I was fine with it. They brought in tight end Deion Sims on a 3-year, $18 million contract. So a little bit substantial on that one, but he's known as a inline blocking tight end, which makes me think that they're really going to try to open holes for the running game this year, giving Jordan Howard more lanes to really be a run first type team. But he's also, which at first I was like, that's a lot of money for a blocking tight end. But I pulled up some tape on him and some scouting reports, and he's not a bad pass catching tight end. So it's one of those ones where when he's out there, you have to, he's going to keep you honest, because you're going to have to account for him in the passing game as well. There's some guys out there where once you see them, you're like, okay, they're going to run, because he's in there. He's at least a decent option. I mean, he's not a Zach Miller out there, but he's a much better blocker than Zach Miller. But he's a sizable guy that can catch passes.
Yeah, you need more blocking. You do. That's been a huge problem with the Bears for many years. They just did not have adequate blocking across the board. So, nice thing to have.
Yeah, and it was especially bad because at the beginning of last season, you saw Zach Miller out there as like a lead blocker. I was like, number one, the guy is as fragile as glass, and two, he's a receiving threat. He is a receiving threat. So don't send him out there to block a middle linebacker.
Right,
Doesn't make
exactly.
any sense. You signed a Deion Sims to go out there and crack some skulls along the line.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. They also signed a safety, Quentin Demps.
I kind of like that signing, and in my opinion right now, what I wouldn't mind seeing the Bears doing, if they could, is take Jamal Adams in the first round with the third pick. And I figured I have this kind of scenario. I'm like, well, if they get Jamal Adams, a guy like Demps is a good veteran presence for him to learn with when he first comes up. But either way, you get a veteran safety. Kind of need it.
Yeah, I'm on the fence with this one. I think it's sort of, for me, I haven't seen the actual contract numbers come out. I don't know if they have, and I haven't seen them, or if they just haven't come out yet. But it was a 3-year deal, and he's going to be 32 when the season starts. So he's on the decline as far as his skill level.
Right. I know he is over 30, yeah.
And that's a little concerning. I mean, I know you can, at the safety position, you can play a little longer. I think Charles Woodson played until he was like 38.
Yeah, he had a long career.
So that was a little concerning. And he had his most productive year. He had early in his career, he was a little bit of a disappointment, but his last couple of years, he was, his numbers were very good, and he was a quality safety, but he also had one of the best defensive lines in football. He's not going to have that in Chicago. So that was a little bit of a down for me. But then I listened to an interview with a long time, I guess not that long, but like he's a beat writer about the Houston Texans, and he spoke so glowingly of Quentin Demps as a clubhouse or a locker room leader and a teacher, and I was like, that's starting to make sense to me. Is
right.
If your defensive backs were so young last year. I mean, other than Porter, is you had Kyle Fuller, who's still young. You have all those young safeties you drafted. Amos is still young. Harold Jones-Corte is still young.
Cravon
LeBlanc, so young. As if you bring a veteran back there that still can play, unlike a certain former New York Giant safety that you signed that showed up to camp fat and stunk in intro role. This guy can still play, and if he's a mentor, then if you bring in a safety in the first round, that he's going to be able to show him the ropes and be like, hey, listen, this is how we do things. This is how we conduct ourselves as NFL players. This is how we train. This is how we show up on game day. This is what you need. Is he's like a player coach, and that kind of sold it for me. And I was on the fence about it, but it sort of made me think, all right, well, the money's not crazy, even though it's 3 years. He's probably not going to make it all. To be able to mentor young players that you have in the secondary, in addition to your quality defensive backs coach and a really good defensive coordinator, that should be able to help you mold your defensive backs.
Yeah, like I said, if they draft more guys, they draft more, like I said, if they were to get Jamal Adams, who I wouldn't mind taking, it's really good to have a veteran presence back there. And if he could still play decently, that's a bonus too. I like what you said about the whole player-coach thing, because that's kind of how I saw him when they signed him.
Yeah, and it was... and the Bears definitely had a plan going in the offseason of addressing the quarterback position, but also to address their defensive backs. And they went after the top two cornerbacks in the draft, in A.J. Boye and Stephon Gilmore. And apparently, from what I read, is they were right in it on Boye until the last minute. And Gilmore, apparently they put in an offer, and Gilmore was not impressed with the offer. I don't know if he was not impressed because he expected more from a bad team, or if the Patriots just offered him a ton of money that the Bears didn't come near. But it's so you saw that they were at least trying to address that with top talent, and just sort of whiffed. And then they whiffed on Logan Ryan as well. I don't know if they went after him, but he was probably the third best cornerback in the free agency.
I know a lot of people wanted him, and they were upset that Pace didn't get him. So yeah.
But I mean, the one thing I am seeing that's looking clear is you see the Bears' glaring needs, and the Bears have, not brought in top talent, but they've brought in somebody to address all of those needs, which makes it possible for the Bears to draft best player available and not leave themselves in a lurch. When you don't address, if they were to cut Cutler and then the only quarterback they had on the whole roster is Connor Shaw, you sort of paint yourself in, well, you know what, first round, we got to draft a quarterback because we are in desperate need. But you bring in a Mike Glennon, you've got Connor Shaw now. You're still going to draft somebody, but it doesn't paint you in a corner. You lose Alshon Jeffrey. It sucks, but you at least bring in more bodies who have NFL experience in you have your former 7th overall pick, and you've got Kendall Wright, who is a former 1,000-yard receiver in this league, and still young. You've at least got enough bodies to where you don't have to paint yourself in a corner. And safety is another place where you're like, all right, well, they desperately need somebody. They're bringing back both last year's starters, and they brought in a veteran who is better than both of those guys. So at least they have some options there. So they've done things where it makes you go, okay, they've at least addressed it to the point where they could draft anybody, and they're just going to make the team better.
Yeah, and here's one thing I really don't understand about our fan base. So, okay, there's a lot of things I don't understand about our fan base, but Bears fans will get mad when they give a lot of money at someone. But when they don't go after someone, they get mad for not spending a bunch of money. So,
Bingo.
I know the Bears have been frustrating. I know. I've been frustrated with ownership and the way things have been managed. But there are times when you got to be realistic here. It's hard to bring in top talent when your team stinks. If you want to bring in top talent when your team stinks, you're going to really have to open a checkbook.
Yeah, and right to your point is, a lot of fans are like, well, just do this. And, here's the thing. You're like, all right,
there's 32 other teams in the league.
Yeah, we'll go out and get a quarterback. All right, well, Tom Brady's under contract. You're not getting Tom Brady. Yeah. Ben Roethlisberger might retire, and if not, he's under contract. Aaron Rodgers under contract.
The Bears, even so,
yeah.
Seriously.
So there's only a handful of good quarterbacks. So everybody else, it's a crapshoot. You're like, all right, we'll go out and sign Stephon Gilmore. Okay, but the thing is he's not a slave. You can't just be like, well, I bought him. You offer him contracts, and he makes a choice of where he wants to go. So if even if you offer him the most money, and he goes, well, you know what? If I can play for the Patriots with Tom Brady, and they just brought in a 1,000-yard receiver and traded for a tight end, so they're going to be stacked again and possibly win a Super Bowl and get a lot of money. Or I can go to the Bears for similar money, but probably get beat up by the Packers every year and not go to the Super Bowl.
Right. Exactly.
It's not as easy as, well, just sign him. These are grown men, and you're wooing them. You're in Stephon Gilmore. There was probably 32 teams wooing him at some point to some degree, and he had a choice.
And could you sit there and tell me and honestly say that there are a bunch of players out there who right now dream of playing for the Bears with the state of the team, the state of the franchise? Do you really think there are people out there just waiting to sign with the Bears as opposed to signing with the freaking Patriots? Think about that.
I mean, a lot of these guys, there is, you think about it, Kendall Wright is, he was not happy with his role last year with the Titans. And I'm sure Bears offered him $4 million for 1 year. I'm sure he didn't have a ton of $4 million a year offers. He was like, all right, well, the Bears offered me the most money, so I'm going to go to them. I'm sure if the Patriots would have offered him $4 million, he'd been like, going to the Patriots. Sometimes sometimes it's about the money. Because, I mean, to you and I, $4 million is a lot of money. But when you're a guy who's like, I don't have another career option that's going to pay me, and I've only got a couple of years to make this money, I'm going to make the most amount of money. But when it's the difference between, I'm going to sign a $58 million contract versus a $63 million contract, it gives you a little more freedom to decide, not let money be the decision factor.
Yeah, and the other thing I really want to enforce about all this is you got to keep in mind that you have a draft coming up, and you're not going to sign guys just to sign guys because, look, they haven't really made their plan clear, but they probably have a good idea of who they're eyeing in the draft. And you're thinking, do you go after that position free agent, or do you have these eyes on the draft? Because it's not like GMs just have one draft board and that's it. They have plan A, scenario A, plan B, scenario B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. There's so on and so forth. So, they work out their scenarios. They look at what they think they can get. They look at what they think they could also get in another scenario. And they evaluate and say, okay, do we want to go out and spend the money on this, this, and this? We'll spend it on this and this, but we'll go with the draft with this. So it's not like they're just not addressing things to not address them. It's so much harder to address them when there are so many other plans and so many different factors in place. Like you said, you can't just say, just sign him. It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, and with the draft, like you said, it's not the, this is what we're going to do. Is they have their big board. They work through their big board constantly as a fluid thing all the way up till draft time. Most teams will do mock drafts where they try to come up with different scenarios of what could happen, trades that could happen, what people will take in front of them. So they're prepared for when it comes. But I mean, the draft is it's really difficult to predict because people are always going to do unpredictable things. So you never know who you're going to come away with. You have ideas of players you want, but who you actually come away with is a different story. So there's, although we started in free agency, is for all intents and purposes, there's two NFL free agencies. Is you have the free agency now where most of those top players are going to sign, and those big crazy deals. You're going to have a few, functional cogs, either of like low-level starters or high-level backups. You're going to have your draft then, and then you're going to have, your June 1 cuts and guys that are still available. That's like your second free agency. I mean, look, is like a Jonathan Hankins is still available. Michael Floyd is still available. Morris Claiborne and Brandon Carr are still available. Cordarrelle Patterson still available. You have almost half of your top 100 free agents still available. And this is, there's going to be a lot of guys available after the draft. And there's going to be some players that, are going to be cut once camp starts. Look at Josh Sitton. We got our starting left guard was a late cut. I mean, we got him last minute.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like it's now or never to get talent. You got a draft to go through, and you have that other so-called free agency period that you do have. So, people are mad that they weren't making a billion moves on the first day. You got to give it time. And like I said, if you're a rebuilding team, there's a difference between rebuilding and retooling. And I'm going to say this. I think a lot of fans don't realize that there are more problems to the Bears than just one or two positions. This team is full of holes, and it's going to take some time to fill them. You can't just say, oh, well, we just need a good, decent quarterback and we're good to go. No, this team is full of holes. And that gets me to my whole point of the whole Jay Cutler narrative. What I said in the tweet was he perfect? No, he was not perfect. But he was often a victim of his own team and too often a scapegoat than how often he should have been. Because
Jay
sorry, go
Cutler,
ahead.
if Jay Cutler would have played in the 80s and the mid to late 90s, is nobody would have hated him like they do now because interceptions were okay. I mean, if Brett Favre played today, people would hate Brett Favre because he threw a lot of
He
interceptions.
threw tons of interceptions.
And that's
Tons of
in
that.
the modern thinking of NFL is turnovers are the worst thing you can do. And Brett Favre in 2017 would he would be what you can, a Jay Cutler type of guy where that you think about him the same way. He's a bad attitude and he throws too many interceptions. So Jay Cutler would have fit better in, that era, the late 80s, 90s, because he was a more of a gunslinger guy, a big arm, don't worry about interceptions, just heave it into the end zone. And that just didn't fly. People never took to Jay Cutler. They hated him basically from the time he got injured in the NFC Championship game to, still today.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Jay Cutler was as good as Brett Favre. Obviously, Brett Favre was still a top talent compared to a lot of people. But yeah, you're right. You're definitely right that style of play was a bit more accepted back then, where today it's not. It's a much more elite passer game today, and that's just kind of how the game evolves. But it's ridiculous when people blame losses on Cutler when the secondary was getting burned, when fundamentals by the entire team were not being performed, when the development was bad, when the coaching was just awful. The Jay Cutler era, if you were to sum it up, really disappointing, because everyone thought when Jay Cutler came here that this was the final missing link between the Bears and a Super Bowl victory. You thought, wow, we have Jay Cutler and we have this team with us that, the great defense and whatnot, and that's what we need to win a Super Bowl. And the closest we got was 2010 when he got hurt in the championship game, but haven't been there since because we've seen terrible drafting. We've seen injuries to key players. We've seen horrid coaching in the Trestman era. We saw defenses that went from being elite early on, people moved on, people retired, to historically bad defenses. The management didn't adjust. The coaching didn't adjust. They didn't build a proper team. The Bears are not bad just because of Jay Cutler. The Bears were bad the last few years because they were a bad, not sound, not stable, poorly coached football team.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the first year under Mark Trestman, Jay Cutler had a good year.
He did.
When it was the defense that was atrocious. And as far as Ryan Pace goes, is a lot of people are just hating on him right now, and I don't understand how you can hate on your general manager before the season starts. I know you're disappointed over the last two seasons, and nobody's happy about that. But you don't realize what a bad position the Chicago Bears were in.
Terrible.
When Lovey left, you were poised for a big drop because Briggs was at the end of his career. Urlacher was at the end of his career. You had all of your top talent. Tillman was at the end of his career. Everybody was at the end of their career as far as your defensive talent. So you were going to have a major drop there. You had, and then you brought in a general manager who had bad drafts. Bad drafts.
And not just one bad draft, multiple bad drafts.
Yeah, so you have multiple bad drafts. Angelo had some really bad drafts as well. And, he was known for getting like one guy a draft. That's just not good enough. So you have aging veterans that you had to part ways with, shed salary, redevelop depth. And I know nobody was happy about this season, but it was as positive as a 3-13 season as you could have. You were in most games. Your guys, for the most part, didn't give up. You've got a good coaching staff in place. You had a really solid draft. You had Jordan Howard looking good. But there was a lot of holes to fill, and you can't just fill everything in one off season.
Right, especially when the free agent class isn't that big, and typically you don't build a team with the free agent class. You do it through the draft. That's just the way the NFL goes. Also, think about the people that he has drafted, Ryan Pace. I mean, look at Jordan Howard. Look at what he's done. Remember when people criticized him for that? Look what he's been by far the best Bear to watch last year.
Yeah, so you were just left with so many holes in this team, and you're right, Jordan Howard was great to watch. Cody Whitehair was really, really good. Your first round pick started to really turn it on at the end of the season. You had some quality players from that draft.
Yeah, and now go back and read the Emery drafts. It's cringeworthy. Cringeworthy. Multiple years that set the Bears back so much.
Yeah, it was, the Emery drafts were just absolutely atrocious. Other than Kyle Long. Kyle Long, it was funny because his very first pick ever was Kyle Long. Next was John Bostic.
He was trash. The only good thing he did was a monster hit in a preseason game.
Yeah, so John Bostic was your second round pick. Kasim Green was your third round pick. Jordan Mills was your fifth round. I'm sorry, Kasim Green was your fourth round pick. You didn't have a third rounder. Jordan Mills was your fifth rounder. Cornelius Washington was your sixth rounder, and he played all right, except he just was always injured.
Yeah.
And then Marquise Wilson was your seventh rounder. He just never, never panned out. So that was your very first draft pick. Is one guy worked out, one guy
over multiple years.
Yeah, and your 2014 draft was Kyle Fuller, Ego Ferguson, Will Sutton, Kadeem Carey, David Fales, Pat O'Donnell, and Charles Leno Jr.
David Fales put up some good preseason numbers a year ago.
Pat O'Donnell, you drafted your starting punter? Charles Leno, I guess, you got a mediocre left tackle in the 7th or 6th round. That's something. But
O'Donnell's been all right, so.
Yeah, so you've had some really, really bad draft picks. 2012, Shea McClellan, Brandon Harden, Evan Rodriguez. You got Alshon Jeffrey in there, but it was, Shea McClellan was your very first pick. Isaiah Fry, Greg McCoy. None of those guys worked out for your team except for Alshon Jeffrey.
Wasn't Shea McClellan basically not on anyone's GM list around that area?
True, but neither was Kyle Long. The thing I never... I don't like to say, oh my God, that was a terrible pick in that round, because you never know what other teams would do. Because think about it, if how do you know that the next team available wasn't going to draft Kyle Long? So you can say, oh, you could have drafted him in the second. You have no idea. You never know what another team was going to do. So if he's that guy you identify, you go get him. Unless it's like, oh, we drafted Cornelius Washington in the first round. That's... but if that's the guy you identify, go get him. I'm not going to bash you for that.
Playing coulda, woulda, shoulda could be one of the most painful things to do when you look at past draft scenarios.
Absolutely. But, last year's draft for Ryan Pace was it was a pretty good draft. I mean, what more could you have asked for in that draft?
Yeah, there was the whole debate over there was a debate over a number of picks, but a lot of it turned out to be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, at first I was not very high on the Leonard Floyd pick, but he's he's turned out to be playing very well. Like, he's playing better than I expected him to play, and I'm seeing the upside that they saw in him.
Absolutely.
In the second round, you have Cody Whitehair, who I was very high on. He played great. Third round, you got Jonathan Bullard, who we'll see. He didn't get a lot of playing time last year, but we shall see on him. But they were very high on him, and I liked him coming out of Florida. Nick Kwiatkowski at the number 4 or the 4th round, who played pretty well when he got to play. And then you got, DeAndre Hall, who showed promise coming out of Northern Iowa. So you look for him to get a little bit better. Jordan Howard, great.
We all know that story.
So you saw some really good picks coming out of that draft class.
Absolutely.
And if Jonathan Bullard can play anywhere near what he looked like he was coming out of Florida, then that is going to be one hell of a draft class.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just don't knock Ryan Pace. That's all I ask the fans is don't knock Ryan Pace until you see what it is.
It's too early. It's way too early.
I mean, look at how many years the Washington Redskins won the offseason Super Bowl, and that team is so dysfunctional. They don't even know. Their general manager didn't show up to the combine.
That team is in shambles right now. It's a whole massive confusion and woe.
Yeah. So, all I ask for the Bears fan is wait until after the season to judge the moves they make. I know Mike Glennon wasn't your number 1 choice at quarterback, but remember it's a year by year deal, and wait to see what it is. If they draft a quarterback in the 1st or 2nd round and he's a bridge, you're not going to be that unhappy about it. Or if he comes in here and plays pretty well, you're not going to be unhappy either. So just wait to see. Just wait till you see, because don't say somebody's screwed up until you've actually seen them screw up.
Right. And again, I know it's not overly exciting, but all you can do is let time tell.
Yeah. And I think the last thing we'll talk about is every week we take a position from the upcoming NFL draft and talk about some of the players in that round. And what I do is I watch actual game film from the player, and I watch every single snap of a game, and I watch multiple games, over the past season, and try to really get a good feel of the player. And if there's players you guys want to see evaluated, I know we had a rush for a while, and we haven't had people reach out in the last couple weeks, but if there's somebody you want to know about and we haven't done that position yet, I'll put it on the list and we'll talk about it when we do that position. And if it's a position we've already done, I'll go back and backtrack and do them the next week. So this week we're looking at cornerbacks. So the first one I looked at was Cameron Sutton. He was a listener, wanted to know more about Cameron Sutton and what I think his prospects are in the NFL. And the guy who suggested like 5 different Tennessee players. So clearly he is a Tennessee Volunteers fan. So Cameron Sutton, 5'11", 186 out of Tennessee. The pros I have on him were he's got some decent speed on him. He's got punt return experience, which is always nice. Some decent instincts on him, but his, when you watch him, his hips are a little bit stiff. You don't see that fluid hip movement that you really like to see. And where you really notice it is when he's covering faster guys, rather than, turn your hips and run that way so you can fluidly change direction, is he actually just turns completely and runs. So you lose against speed guys, you're susceptible to double moves in that way. And you saw that actually with double moves. Double moves burned Cameron Sutton pretty bad. So my ultimate on him is he's got some special teams ability that are going to get him a roster spot. And he's going to really need to he's going to have to bulk up a little bit and work on his technique if he wants to stay on the field for defensive snaps.
Yeah, this WalterFootball.com is projecting him to be about a 3 or 4 round pick, so not sure if you see him that high or not.
I see him somewhere around there. Is the punt return is going to definitely move him higher up on some people's boards because that's always having a guy with punt return experience is always nice, and he was a pretty decent punt returner, so it's going to move him up. But I did like some of the things I saw. He's just going to have to really work, and I don't ever see him being like a shutdown number 1 type corner. Next up was Marlon Humphrey, 6 foot 197 out of Alabama. The pros on him are, again, he has a lot of special teams experience, so that's gonna day one he can come in and play special teams for you. When there's a running play, I have never seen a college cornerback attack the run like I've seen Marlon Humphrey do, which is a real plus in my book. He's not afraid to go, if there's a lead blocker, to blow up that lead blocker and try to drive him back into the running back. He's got some good size and build on him, very physical, very athletic guy. The cons I have on him are his footwork and his fundamentals are lacking, which is really weird because of that well-coached Alabama team that you would expect them to really work on that kind of thing. But his footwork and fundamentals aren't that great, and he relies way too much on his athletic ability over his actual football skill. And when there's deep balls, he gets pretty handsy with receivers, which is in the NFL and or in the college when you play for an Alabama and you're top player, you get away with those. In the NFL, you're not going to get away with those. So, my ultimate note on him was super physically talented guy with some glaring red flags on tape, but I would be really comfortable taking him early. I think he's a really hard worker, and I think he's going to be able to overcome a lot of those red flags that people raised. He's probably number 1 in my cornerback rankings.
Yeah, he's rated number 1 on WalterFootball.com, and they project him to be a top 20 pick. So it pretty much summed up your whole spiel on him being a very physical defender. So, yeah.
I think he'll probably be the 3rd corner picked overall, but I think he's going to be the best of the corners. I really like him, especially coming out of that program. The next guy I looked at was Marshawn Lattimore, 6 foot 190 out of Ohio State. Again, here's another amazing athlete. Very fluid hips. He's got the ability to press off the line or to mirror coverage on wide receivers. Very, very fast. The cons I have on him are he's got some soft tissue injury concerns. So, those nagging muscle pulls and things like that. And he pulled up on his pro day, I believe, or before his pro day. He's only a 1-year starter as well, and his fundamentals aren't that great. Every scout, though, seems to be absolutely in love with Marshawn Lattimore. I think he's all right, but again, he's another guy that relies on his physical abilities over his football talents, but I don't see him as physical enough for me. I like Marlon Humphrey a lot better, but he was still definitely a first rounder in my book.
Yeah, Walter Football also has him as a top 20 pick. So obviously I think a lot of people are seeing some upside on him.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would be. I think he's probably going to be the first cornerback that goes in the draft, but he's not the first in my book. But he's definitely a first rounder. He's got too much raw ability, I think, but he's got work to do. He's not he's not a super clean, prospect coming out. Next in that I looked at was Sidney Jones, 6'1", 187 out of Washington. He is really physical at the line of scrimmage. He attacks the run a lot like Marlon Humphrey, except not as much, but he really will attack the run on run plays. A decent blitzer. He played on a big time defense that's played a lot of big time teams, and that Washington defense was really stout, and he was arguably the best player on that team. And he's got some really nice field vision. But for as physical as he plays, big receivers will bully him on inside moves. So he'll give up that inside moves and on slant routes. And it was pretty consistent when he did that. He's going to also need to get stronger in his upper body. Again, physical receivers could, really break away from that press at the coverage, the line of scrimmage. And he's much quicker than he is fast. His 40 time wasn't as blazing as I thought it was going to be. I've seen some people rate him as the highest rated cornerback in this draft, and there are a lot of things to like about him, but I'm a little bit hesitant of him. I probably move him behind Marlon Humphrey and Marshawn Lattimore, but again, I see him as pretty easy first round pick unless something drastic happens between now and the draft.
Yeah, they have him projected on WalterFootball.com as a first-round pick. Not necessarily top 20, but a first-round pick.
Yeah, I would be pretty shocked if he fell out of the first round. The next guy I looked at was Teez Tabor from Florida, 6', 197. The pros I have on him are he pretty much looks the part of an NFL cornerback physically. He's that prototypical size and build. Some nice instincts and ability to mirror receivers, and he's pretty physical against the run and in his tackling. He's not afraid of getting hit or giving a hit, but he just needs to get stronger. You can see that even though he wants to hit somebody, he just doesn't drive anybody, and he drags a lot of people down on tackles. So he's going to have to get physically stronger. He had a disappointing 40 time. I mean, it's not that he was slow, but what you expect out of a corner was a little bit slow. And if you watch him, and I didn't notice in the first game I watched, but it was the second game, made me go back and rewatch the first game, is he plays way off of receivers. He doesn't do press coverage. He plays way off of receivers. And that was a red flag for me. And I like his talents as far as his ability to cover, but it makes me feel like there's a reason why he's not pressing anybody. Either he's afraid he's going to get shoved off the line and not be able to jump back into coverage or he is so wary of his own lack of speed that he wants to give a cushion and not get burned by somebody. So it was a red flag for me. I see him, honestly, though, he's a corner, and he does have some decent cover skills. I would probably transition him as a free safety.
Walter Football projects him to be between 1 and 2, but it seems like they're a little more towards him being a second rounder than a first rounder.
Yeah, I could see that. Two more guys. Second last one is Jordan Lewis, 5'10", 175 out of Michigan. I love Jordan Lewis's style of play. He's got great drive, fundamentally very solid, good press coverage, nice athleticism. He's got good field speed. The big problem with him is he's undersized. He's way undersized, and he's going to have matchup problems in the NFL against big wide receivers, both as far as their height and their strength. If you could take this guy's fundamentals and his heart and his skills and put it in Sidney Jones or Marshawn Lattimore's body, you would have a top 5 pick. But you can't teach size, so I think that's going to hurt Jordan Lewis. But I think he's going to be a guy that sticks around for a long time in this league as a slot corner that's just pesky.
Yeah, this is more of a 3-4 guy people are talking about, pretty much for the same reasons. 3-4 as in third round or fourth round.
Yeah, I would be very comfortable if he was available in the, I guess with the Bears, they're so early. If, mid third round, I would be very comfortable drafting him. And then the last guy I did was, he's probably going to, on people's draft boards, is going to be a very divisive guy. And this is Desmond King out of Iowa, 5'10", 201 pounds. Pros on him are he is a former Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, which the Big Ten is a football conference, and to be able to get the best Defensive Player of the Year award, that speaks volumes. 4-year starter. He played in 95% of the Iowa defensive snaps over the last 4 years, so he stays healthy, and he's been good for 4 years. He's got his football IQ is through the roof. Watching him play, you're not going to fool him at all. He reads the quarterback really well. He's got good anticipation. There's so much to love about this guy, but the big con with him is he lacks good speed. And the fact that he's not one of the top-rated guys and he didn't run at the combine, that screams to me that he is really worried about his time, and he's going to wait to run his pro day where he can optimize everything and run with the wind at his back and all these other things to add a little bit of speed to him. And he lacks the best footwork and athleticism and fluidity. So you watch him, he's very fundamentally sound, but just athletically, you just don't see that in him. And he gets a little bit grabby sometimes with wide receivers. For me, it's hard to hate a guy with the instincts and productivity that he's had in college. You just have to give him respect. I would be very comfortable drafting him in the mid rounds and converting him to a safety, because I think he could be a very successful safety. He's got the size, and he's got the understanding of how a defense works and reading a quarterback. I just wouldn't be comfortable drafting him as a cornerback.
Yeah, that's kind of what this says here, and they have him drafted between 2 and 3, but kind of leaning more towards 3.
3 is probably the earliest I would be comfortable with him. I mean, I think he's going to be a guy that somebody's going to reach on him just because of the pedigree he has of playing as a 4-year starter for a solid Iowa team and being a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year and those types of things. They go a long way in a non-metrically driven NFL, but I think ultimately he's going to be a safety, and it's going to be how you evaluate him as a safety.
Sure.
So that's going to do it for cornerbacks. Next week be a pretty short one because it'll be centers, and I don't know how many centers there are that are top kind of quality, but we'll be looking at centers. So unless you have anything to add, Alex, I think this is going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago.
I just wanted to bring up one question one of my friends asked me. He wanted to kind of get your take and kind of our take collectively on Russ with the 422 40 at the combine. I'm sure you heard and seen that.
Yep. That was fast.
Yeah, really fast. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, it's when you run in your underwear, in the Underwear Olympics, you can't take that away. He's a fast guy, but honestly, how well does that translate into your ability to play on the field? Somebody's gonna overdraft based on that number. But when I scouted him, I mean, right off the bat, I said he has the speed to take the top off a defense. He's really quick. He's fast. He's athletic. Great college production and such. But no matter how fast he is, he's a 5'11" wide receiver. That's really going to hurt him. He's not physically strong. It's big cornerbacks are going to jam him at the line, and he's going to, you look at a Deshaun Jackson. He's going to be a similar type guy to a Deshaun Jackson. Is if when he beats you, it's a highlight reel. When he doesn't, he'll
get burned.
He looks terrible. I mean, the thing is, he just Deshaun Jackson, there's games where he just looks absolutely terrible because he gets beat up and they let him play physical. But those games where he, they don't have the cornerbacks to jam him, he, reels off these 70-yard touchdown catches. That's John Ross right there. I mean, I think he's better than Deshaun Jackson, but that's the type of guy you're getting.
Yeah, pretty much. I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, so, it's cool to see that guy is just blazing fast, and, it's as a fan, you have no idea how fast even running a 4.950 40 is. Just your average Joe fan thinks, I can go out there and run a 4.6. No, you can't.
No,
you can't. Go out there and time yourself. Measure it out, 40 yards, and run it. And you're going to run like a 5.4. You are not fast. Even if you're you're fast in your flag football league, if you go out there and run, you're going to realize real quick that 4.2, 4.3 is lightning fast.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, I guess that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please make sure that you hit subscribe however you listen to podcasts, whether that be iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Share it with friends. And if you need to get in touch with us, Alex's Twitter at ShyFanPat1 or at Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports. Thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears! Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.